Hi, it's us again. Welcome to the Conversation Hub. And we have stayed with the lovely Tim Silk. And welcome, Tim. Do you want to say a little bit more about yourself?
Well, yes. Hello, my name is Tim Silk, and I work with Christian business leaders across North America and the UK, and to help them to get to the root of what is challenging them, or to find some of the greater motivations for what is spurring them on.
Well, that's great. And I'm pleased to say that we have Tim as an associate. So we're delighted you've joined us here. And the title of today's Conversation Hub is Why Do We Do Things? Motivations and Drivers. And perhaps you can sort of go to that, Tim, and just give us your view on it.
Well, I think we're pretty sure that why we do things is a pretty complex issue, but I think broadly, I think it's helpful to be able to at least be aware of what's motivating us and what's driving us. And I would put a pencil definition of what's motivating is often front facing. If I do this as a cause and effect, I will get that, usually quite positive. And then the drivers are tend to be from my past, or things on my back or on my shoulders, less positive, borderline negative, that I must do this, I've got to, I should, I must. That's driving me on. And once we can be aware of what those things are, we can then begin to say, well, are they true or not? And if they are not true, we can do something with them. If they are true, we can do something with them.
I love the definition. Motivators are things that pull us forward, and drivers are things that push us. And there are lots of examples of pull push in the modern world. I just want to sort of hone in a little bit on drivers, because I think that's where coaching can really help an individual. Drivers affect us all, and there are both, as you've just said, negative and positive drivers. And I think one of the thing that we talk about when we coach is, well, how do we bring the drivers that are positive? How do we bring those to a coaching situation, to an individual, to support and help them to develop, versus not discounting negative drivers, because sometimes they can have a positive effect, but to make sure that an individual, so when an individual has been fired, okay, that's a good example of that can often be a driver in their life. It certainly was for me. I was fired at a very young age, 20, and it was a real driver for me in terms of understanding why I responded to certain things in a way, and why I shouldn't respond to them in another way. What about you? Where have you found drivers, and how do you use them in your coaching practice?
Well, I a more difficult one, not necessarily negative, because the fruit of a negative thing can sometimes be redeemed. So the relationship someone might have with parents, and what the encouragement or not that they got, the presence or not that the presence of the person or not that they received, um, then drove that person to perform, drove that person where dad perhaps wasn't available or wasn't able to provide, has driven that person forward to never repeat that. They want to push things forward. And the result is they've achieved a great deal, but then in someone's 2 or 3, 4 decades down the line, in a coaching conversation, you might begin to unearth, well, that's what's got me to this point, but I've no longer need to be driven by this because I've just got it all. But the behaviors keep pushing me forwards. And that can often be a problem when an organization has got to a certain point, that actually now's the time to give away, to delegate, to give accountability to others. People would struggle, founders sometimes would struggle to give that away, because they're driven by something way back there, and they've been carrying this for 30 years, and it's very difficult for them to release stuff. Would be one way I would see that.
Oh, fascinating. So I was having as you know, I do coaching supervision, and I was supervising someone in the last week. Let's say we can't nail it to an individual, And they were talking about a situation where someone who had been the CEO of the business, say no more than that, was still in the business, and they'd recruited another CEO. And it was fascinating because I said to them, what was the mandate that the first CEO worked under from the board and the chair specifically? And what was the mandate that the second CEO was working under and from the chair? And how are those mandates shared and understood between the three parties? Because there is an issue of relationship between the three, behaviors. Particularly, there's quite a bit of light blue touch paper, stand well back because it's going to go bang. And I think we often find ourselves in this situation where mandates, and what I mean by that is the instruction to be responsible and where you have authorization and ownership, are little understood and little discussed. I've often asked boards for what's your board charter with the executive and the CEO, whether it just doesn't exist. So for me, when we talk about why do we do things, I'm particularly keen to understand, well, do you do things on the basis of mutual understanding and mutual authorization and mutual authority and a mutual ownership or individual ownership? Are you doing things based on what you think you should own and what you think you've been mandated to do? What's your experience of this? Because these are drivers. These mandates are clearly drivers.
I think it's quite rare actually for people in organisations to be very clear. In my experience of organisations and working in institutions, it's incredibly unclear, the limits of responsibility, the mandate, etc. And where there has been stated accountability lines, they were rarely followed, certainly not with any care. And I think that is, and that's quite tricky given my background to Church of England. There are other. I used to sit in the Church of England thinking everything else was okay. It's just us that's messing it up. And now in the last few years, been working the outside of the Church of England. I think we've all got a challenge there. It's a human challenge of really not just why we do things, but how we're going to agree to do things around here so that people can flourish in their areas of accountability, so that people can bring their full 100% selves to the problem solving that we face. So yeah, my experience of that has been personal, which has been really hard. Therefore, I'd be passionate about trying to help clarify that so people can flourish where they are.
You used a lot. So sorry about that. Start again. You used a lovely term there that I really want to go back to, and that is one of clarity. And I tend to find when I'm coaching people that there's often a significant lack of clarity. What do you mean by clarity, and how do you find this projected into the business situation?
Well, let's borrow some language from a completely different discipline. So I would often say trauma makes you blind. And often
Ooh.
trauma is what drives people forward. And getting out of trauma is often what motivates people forward. But because trauma makes you blind, clarity is not something we enjoy. Because I can't see myself clearly, I can't see other people clearly. And when there is more than one of us, we've got with the problem, don't make me say the Frank Spencer thing of the trouble shared is a trouble doubled. But then you imagine sitting in a team and then you've got a whole board and everyone's bringing their way of viewing things to the table. Everyone, it's very clear. Clarity is mine. I get it, but we don't get it. And I think that is why it can be so painful and monotonous, and why we're losing a lot of talent, because we're not clarifying who does what, where, why, where, when, how, because no one is perhaps sitting down with us and saying, how's this going to work? How's it going to work for both of you? I find this with coaching people. I love coaching people one-to-one. That's great, but more often than not, you have to work with the person north and south of them on the 360. You have to work with their teams to get the best out of them, to say, how is this working? Who, right? Show of hands, or tell me who's responsible for this. What are we aiming at? What are you doing? And in the most extraordinary organizations, it's quite difficult sometimes to get a clear answer. So I think clarity it is the secret sauce. Is it a silver bullet? Probably not, but it's certainly the secret sauce of business at the moment, is clarifying what's happening, what we're doing. But as I say, that's often masked by our experience of what's driving us and even what's motivating us personally. And because we don't talk about it, we don't know what other people are facing.
That tie-in that you've just taken us from drivers to motivation, I really like. Clarification of purpose, clarification of being authentic about where we're going and why we're doing it. I think that is something that, and removing ambiguity. And I've personally found I struggled with this. I'm 63 now, and I probably struggled with this for 45 years. So I'm always amazed, and I mean genuinely amazed in the true sense of the word. People will believe that ambiguity and a lack of clarity is their friend. In other words, they believe that they can adjust the end goal and adjust what's being done to suit an ambiguity about what they're trying to achieve and do, as though they want to pat themselves on the back for not being accountable, not owning what it is that they said they wanted to do. And so I mean, in terms of motivation, I honestly, I'm still genuinely thunderstruck by the number of people who go, well, I'm not quite sure we want to be as precise as that. And you look at them and you say, well, why not? And what's your experience of that? I mean, have you come across that? And if you did, do you ever get them to answer the question?
Well, going back to my previous work in a church, I remember going to lead a church. I was my late 30s. I was accused of being, this is not a corporate environment. You favor young people. And I dug into what was actually going on. It's because I used a flip chart to gather people's thoughts. And I think getting through that to say, look, no, we don't favor we don't want to normalize dysfunction. We don't want to sanctify fog here. We're very clear about what we're trying to do, aren't we? Oh, are we? What are we? And getting that conversation going. So yes, that has been massively my experience of people, let's call it sanctifying the fog and pushing away clarity, which I think was terrible in my previous role, but I think it's costing a lot of money, and it's costing a lot of talent to do that in today's business world, where we're just not clear. And it's all very well one person being clear, but we must be clear. It's got to be the shared conversation about anyone around the table, any stakeholder should be able to ask some basic questions about what are we doing here, what are we aiming for, when have we agreed this is going to be done by, how much is it going to cost, who's in charge, who's driving this thing. Everyone should understand these and be able to answer these basic questions. But because we normalize dysfunction, often because it's a shortcut and it's too difficult to have got these conversations, I think we end up saying, well, it's just the way it works, but it's just the way it doesn't work is the problem.
There's a couple of phrases that I love, and we'll come back to the first one I'm going to mention in a minute. First one, which is sanctify the fog. I just love that phrase, and you ought to copyright it, because I'm going to be using it. Let's put it that way.
I've been trying to avoid it all these years.
Well, yeah, and then let's just you said something else, which is, I think I can only say I've seen this in, I've just referred to, 63, and I've been in business 45 years. Normalizing dysfunction. I have seen not just things that are done, not just activities, not just behaviors, as we were talking about previously, but the normalization of dysfunctional people, not them, their behaviors not being taken to one side and saying, and there's a much deeper, probably quite dark place we could go to here that I don't want to go to. That's for psychologists. But what do you see that really pries into your heart and makes you really think about, how can I help this situation, because it's down to normalized dysfunction? Have you got good examples of that? Because if you haven't, I have.
Why don't you tell us your example, Michael?
Well, I was quite young. I was in my 20s, and I had a sales manager, lovely guy, got on with him really well, and he had become my boss after a couple of other people. In fact, and one of the words that always stuck with me is that he said to me, he came round to see me. We were going out into the field, and he said, "I can't believe," or words to this effect, "I can't believe what I'm about to tell you, but I was coming today to put you on a personal improvement plan," which is not what they were called then. But unfortunately, I've got to congratulate you for winning the Salesperson of the Year title. Now, what he didn't like was that I didn't function the way he wanted me to function, irrespective of looking at the results. Now, I'm sure I wasn't perfect. I'm sure there were lots of things that I contributed to. But he had normalized dysfunctional behavior as the behavior that he wanted to see. And he never, ever, ever, ever said to me, "Right, I know I don't understand you, and I think I know I don't like the way you do things, but can you at least sit down and explain to me why you're successful?" He never did that. Now, I call that normalizing dysfunction, because he still had another 10 salespeople. He still went out to the other 9 and said, "What you're doing is not functional." And he didn't try to repeat parts of what I was doing. I'm sure I wasn't perfect. Parts of what I was doing in the others. I just found that, even at the age of the time, 27 maybe, I just found it really bizarre.
Well, positively,
That's the sort of normalizing.
I would say positively that experience informed the way that you would speak to others, and I've seen you do that with others. Is you catch people doing good things, and you'll be encouraging, and you'll celebrate their behaviors. Is that because of what your sales manager was like? I don't know, but it probably contributes to it. I have certainly experienced that in my world, because I might do a good thing, give a good sermon, preach, that sort of stuff, lead, turn things around, start new franchises or church plants or whatever. And I was surprised, but other people were surprised to say, if you have achieved this, why is this not being rolled out as a way of encouraging others to do it? And it never was in 25 years, which was, I always found just slightly, I just didn't understand it, because on one level there was this, we've got to change things, we've got to get examples of good things. well done, you've done this really well, was rarely said. I used to hear it on the grapevine, but never put in place. And I thought maybe it was just me, but it seems to be hardwired, the normalization of dysfunction hardwired into the system. And then you see a trending downwards in terms of reach, numbers, facility, um, property, all that sort of stuff just disappears off the slides off. But I think that's a human behavior that needs to be addressed in order to help people be really good at being managers, really good at being humans.
What? So when you say that's a human behavior that needs managing in that dysfunctional space, what do you give me? Do you have an example? Can you talk me through something that's happened to you? Because I think we have a lot of those. I mean, we worked on a program together, quite a big program of work where we saw that. Tell me about some of those ideas that you've seen. Sorry.
Well, I suppose some of them are deeply personal, but I think I've engaged with people at all stages of life, whether that's children and parents, adult children referring to their parents, etc. But that would be a classic of people not experiencing the sort of encouragements from or presence in terms of coming and watching them play sport, to that then drives them or motivates them actually to be different in their own families. So they would a bad situation is in a sense redeemed and becomes a good example of that. Yeah, that would be the only example I think I've got.
We worked on a project together, and it was quite clear that for me that this commercial situation, it was in the entertainment business, let's call it, make it as broad as that. And we were working in London, and we worked in various other communities around Europe, countries. And the normalized dysfunction in that company was just, well, it was awful. And we looked around at the way things were done. And the CEO was I think 100% committed to getting rid of dysfunction, but it had become so normalized. I wondered whether they were ever going to break the mold, and they did some work. They did other work with us, and then they stopped. I'm not making.
And I think that would be a classic example of what's got to happen, either good or bad, for enough people to say enough. And all the while the money is flourishing and the revenues, turnovers turning over, all that is going on, and the board are happy because they don't see everything. They can see the numbers and they're happy with the numbers, but they don't see the culture. That's when it takes a superhuman effort or a massive a downturn or a COVID moment, shall we say, for people to say, hang on a minute, this isn't going to work. We've got to do something about this.
I'm very conscious we're coming towards the end, and I want you've put in something else there that what are we measuring? What are you measuring? I think that's and what's the culture? And we go back to behaviors, motivations, and so forth. But I do want to come back to your favorite phrase that you dropped in earlier, and that is to sanctify fog. I just absolutely take me down the sanctified fog route. Let's talk about that a bit.
Well, I wonder if it's a British thing. Is it an English thing that we don't like clarity? Is it a peacetime, wartime thing? That in wartime things become much clearer and what matters becomes much clearer? Is it that we've just had a long period of peace? But I don't know where it comes from, but I know it's in the atmosphere that people don't tend to celebrate things that are excellent. that they tolerate things that are foggy. They tolerate lack of clarity around functions, around spending, around budgets. Budgets less so, but behaviours outside of numbers. No, you just get it done. Just keep the wheels turning, which I think is a real problem.
Well, we're not that famous political podcast, so let's not go into the politics of what you've just said. Although it's an easy entry, I think. But I do think what you've just said is very interesting in terms of the part you discussed. People aren't. It's not a time of war, and I think there has been a significant drift to being unaccountable. Now, that's not the same as being irresponsible. And loads of people claim responsibility and say, I'm responsible for this. And then they find all sorts of excuses about why it didn't happen. And again, there's lots of political examples of that. What I do think is that about sanctifying fog is I think the fog of the lack of accountability is huge. People, you say to people, accountability is 20% responsibility. Okay, did you say what you were going to do? But it's 80% of the value of it, maybe 70%, but it doesn't matter. A large part of it, proportion, majority of it, is about what are you going to do into the future? That brings us back into the motivational piece. How do you take the responsibility and turn that into being accountable for what you're going to do with the results? What are you going to do? How does where you've got affect what you're going to do in the future? How do you make it motivational? And I think that's where the challenge of of not sanctifying fog, not celebrating a lack of clarity, has taken us.
I think there is a slightly darker side of the fog, which is fear, that people are just not sure what's coming. That there's in the big scheme of things, but also in the smaller scheme of things. If you've heard that there are going to be redundancies, you've heard that there's going to be departments not going to make it. If tariffs are going to affect your business, that means that the long-term future, the motivation is gone. I think the way then is to really reduce the lens, which I think brings clarity in terms of, well, let's have a 60-day view on this, not just a 12-month view. That would help. I think that people are a bit fearful around the place, but that is where I think leaders of organizations get to build trust by taking responsibility and actively showing accountability for the organization within which people work.
Oh, that's well. That allows me to plug in. We're going to be having our CEO MD retreat in November, and there we're going to be talking about ownership and communication, and a lot of that is about prioritization and have you set motivational goals, North Stars, as one of my colleagues calls it. I think the problem is we have sanctified, we have made being mushy and unclear almost an observable benefit, which it just isn't. And coaching and clarification of leadership and understanding organizational design and who owns what and who's accountable for which, I think is how you get rid of sanctified fog. And that's something we work on a lot. So look, we're coming towards the end. I'm going to give you the time to reflect on what you and I have said now.
Look, Michael, I think that so often the people I work with, they don't need more information. They need clarity on what they already know, and they need courage to put it into practice. And they need to slow down, which is an absolute life's work, but slow down enough to see things more clearly and to catch up with what needs to happen. And I think things like the retreat is a genius way, a gift actually, to CEOs and others to actually take the time just to say, I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to address the fog that we've normalized and we've sanctified, and I want to bring clarity to this organization.
On those lovely words, may we end. Thank you, Tim Silk. It's been wonderful to have you on the Conversation Hub. And until next time, we'll say goodbye.
Goodbye.
Oh, if I can get it to end.